We do have a big crowd. That's good. I hadn't seen this many people since the last Ole Miss football game.
That was a good one, wasn't it?
It was a good one.
That was a good one to see. Good night. They got a big crowd here, man.
I'm a big fan of your match.
But we can't fall back.
I've seen that happen before.
That's Leonard Mann's right hand. He's the executive director of the Mississippi Press.
That meets on the Saturday.
Good afternoon.
Is
it on?
Really
Good afternoon.
If you invite me, I'll come.
Yeah, that one. Generous thing to do.
"30 years ago, then Governor William Winter set into motion events that would soon be known as the Christmas Miracle in Mississippi. We're here to celebrate that occasion and those accomplishments. I'm Rob Perigin, and as president of Millsaps College, I want to thank you all for joining us on this 30th anniversary of the passage of the Education Reform Act of 1982. It is our privilege here at Millsaps to be in the presence of so many of you who were instrumental in that signature event in our state's history. Hosting this event on campus provides an opportunity to celebrate models of leadership we seek to cultivate in our students, models of foresight, courage, and conviction. We celebrate the accomplishments of those who fought for education reform for many reasons, not the least is because the kind of moral imagination that challenges the status quo is still needed in Mississippi and beyond. In 1982, just as today, facts and evidence alone were not winning the debate about education reform. The state legislature completed its session by ignoring a study that showed children in our state were being shortchanged because Mississippi was the last state without mandatory public kindergarten, the last state without compulsory school attendance, the lowest in teacher salaries, and the poorest in quality assessment. The governor and his allies saw that the time had come for leaders to take risks, to be advocates, to put careers on the line. Standing before the state legislature, Governor Winter did just that, stating, "We keep looking for easy answers. We keep trying not to rock anybody's boat. Well, I want to tell you it's boat rocking time in Mississippi. It's time to get off our backsides." That took unusual courage and conviction, virtues that prompted Millsaps to award Governor Winter the first of his now many honorary degrees just 6 months after the passage of the Reform Act. Thank you, Governor Winter, and welcome back to Millsaps. We also welcome as panelists some members of Governor Winter's 1982 staff, known as the Boys of Spring, who embraced that label aimed at them by a legislator who was opposed to reform, and they wore it as a badge of honor, a reflection of new beginnings. We have with us Andy Mullins, an alumnus of Millsaps, of whom we're very proud. After serving as special assistant to Governor Winter, Andy went on to establish the Mississippi Teacher Corps, which trains college graduates to teach in high-poverty Mississippi schools. He's also served as chief of staff to 3 chancellors at Ole Miss, and on an entirely voluntary basis as a special friend and advisor to the president of Millsaps. That's me. Thank you, Andy. John Hennigan, chief of staff to Governor Winter, is now one of Jackson's most highly respected lawyers and one of its great civic leaders. Dick Malpas, executive director of federal state programs under Governor Winter, went on to serve as Secretary of State from 1984 to 1996 and founder of Parents for Public Schools in Jackson in 1989, which grew into a national public school advocacy organization. David Cruz, as my classmate and friend at Sewanee, David was known by the faculty for his keen intellect and sharp writing skills, and known by the co-eds for his good looks and Mississippi charm. Little did we know that he would become Governor Winter's press secretary, a U.S. Marshal, and now clerk of the federal court for the Northern District of Mississippi. And I'm humbled to think that back in 1982, while I was writing a master's thesis that got put on a back shelf in the library basement at Duke University, my friend David was playing a key role in helping transform education in his home state. And it was Charles Overby, the editor of the Clarion Ledger, who almost single-handedly set a new standard for journalism in the state by flooding the Capitol with reporters publishing 2 or 3 articles a day, publishing legislative votes, and writing editorials, which ultimately landed the paper a Pulitzer Prize. We were privileged to award Charles a Millsaps honorary degree last May and recognize his role in 1982 and since then as a champion of freedom of the press by the establishment of Newseum, the Freedom Forum, and the Diversity Institute. Just as the Reform Act was a bold imagining of a different future for Mississippi, Millsaps is engaged in discussions with faculty, staff, students, alumni, friends, donors, about an ambitious role for the college in educating the next generation of citizen leaders and in helping meet the needs of our city and state. Our new strategic plan, entitled Across the Street and Around the Globe, Partnerships and Influence at Millsaps College, builds on our location in the heart of Mississippi's capital city and on our historical focus on freedom of thought, social justice, and reflection on life's most important questions. The strategic plan challenges our students and ourselves to develop not just the habits of mind to excel in the workplace, but also the habits of heart that can lead to educational, political, and economic transformation of our state and nation. This means that we at Millsaps are engaged in our own reform efforts, both in how we teach our students and how we educate them to use their skills to engage and influence the larger world. In the context of education itself, our efforts are notable, from requiring every class in our education department to have a field component which prepares students, future teachers, for early success in their careers, to creating opportunities with the help of community partners like the Walker Foundation and Midtown Partners, with our undergraduates to work with students at Brown Elementary, to our creation of the Advanced Placement Institute and the Principals Institute that attract hundreds of educators to our campus annually, to a program we're launching this year with the help of the Cargill Philanthropies to provide teacher training in cultivating curiosity, discipline, and character in elementary students as part of their educational successes. At Millsaps, civic engagement is an integral part of education, not simply an enriching add-on. We're committed to our community, and we're committed to graduating students who embrace theologian Frederick Buechner's challenge to compose a life where the intersection of one's deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. At Millsaps, we're bold enough to believe we're graduating the next generation of boat rockers and the next round of visionary boys and girls of spring. So now, today, we honor the success of the Education Reform Act, and we look forward to the remarks of our leaders whose vision, energy, and commitment are worthy not only of celebration, but emulation. Please join me in welcoming Governor Winter, Charles Overby, and the boys of spring.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Rob Perrigan, we are honored to be on this campus today. What more appropriate place to gather for a discussion of education than Millsaps College? You have been an intellectual oasis in Mississippi for a long time, and it provided an inspiration to many of us at times when the lights were flickering out there and we were wondering if Mississippi was going to survive the 60s. But we did, thanks to you and your predecessors and to the students and faculty and alumni of Millsaps College. We're indebted to you. And I also want to thank all of you for being here today and participating with us in a discussion of education in Mississippi. Ken Townsend, I want to thank you for helping arrange this. And I know I have some sense of how much work has gone into it, and I cannot think of a more delightful experience for me than to come on this campus and talk about education. Somebody had characterized me as an advocate for education. And they said, now what is an advocate? And somebody said, well, that's a fellow that does a lot of talking. Well, I will confess to having done a lot of talking. As I told Jim Barksdale one time, after he'd made that very generous contribution to education in Mississippi, I said, Jim, you're putting your money where my mouth is. Well, I learned very quickly that one mouth isn't worth very much. And as soon as I was elected governor, literally as soon as I was elected governor, I looked around and I said, now what do I have to do? And I think I knew what I had to do. I had to surround myself with some of the brightest, visionary, pragmatic people that I could get. And here's some of them lined up right here, the Boys of Spring. And sitting with them is the former editor of the Clarion Ledger, Charles Overby. Nothing would have been accomplished. I guarantee you, nothing would have been accomplished at that special session. But for the leadership and the vision and the candor of these people sitting here and their colleagues, there were many people in this state who spoke out in support of the Education Reform Act. And a lot of you are in this room, and I wish I could name everyone who contributed, but I thank all of you for doing that, not for me, but for the state. And I want to thank my wife, Elise. She was kind of pushing me along when I would get a little bit down. But let me very briefly describe the atmosphere in which the Education Reform Act was conceived. We had just gone through the 70s. The 70s were not a good time in Mississippi. We were absorbing the dislocation that came with the massive desegregation of schools in 1970 as a result of the final almost 20 years after the Brown decision. And morale was low. Morale among parents was low. Morale among teachers was low. Appropriations were minimum, and there was not a good feeling about education. When I ran for governor, and I had to run 3 times to be elected, education was my main plan. And I talked to my good friend Julian Carroll, who was then the governor of Kentucky, and he had been elected in 1975 as governor of Kentucky, and I had been defeated in Mississippi by the largest margin that anybody had ever been defeated in the second primary. So I called Julian and I said, Julian, tell me how you got elected. He said, well, let me ask you, what did you run on? I said, I ran on education. He said, that's where you made a mistake. He said, education has no political constituency. I said, what did you run on? He said, I ran on better paying jobs for everybody. And so 4 years later, I ran again with the misgivings of most of my friends. And I talked a lot about better paying jobs. And I was elected by the biggest majority that anybody had ever been elected. Well, we were both right. Better paying jobs is what education is all about. But you have to have education before you get better paying jobs. And that's where we decided that we would try to sell the people of Mississippi on the importance of a quality education. and there were a lot of cynical and skeptical people out there. But this is where Charles Overby and the Boys of Spring came in. And we organized, and we got the people behind us. We went all over the state, 9 or 10 public forums, and innumerable small gatherings. Wherever, Lee said, wherever 3 or 4 people were gathered together, one of us would show up and talk about education. And we could see the momentum swinging toward the passage of a significant education program. But the atmosphere in the legislature was almost unchanged. I decided to call a special session, December the 6th, 1982. And the reaction among the legislative leadership, most of it was, well, poor Winter, he doesn't know when he's through, does he? The chairman of the Finance Committee of the Mississippi State Senate, who was an absolutely necessary player, supporter, called a press conference and he said, the governor's made a mistake. We're not going to take this up. I'm not even going to call a meeting of my committee. The chairman of the Ways and Means Committee of the House of Representatives, his response was, let us go to Jackson, meet, pay the governor our respects, and tell him that we will come back in January and pass a bill. That was the atmosphere. And yet, a little less than 3 weeks later, the Mississippi legislature, to their eternal credit, had passed the most sweeping Education Reform Act in the history of Mississippi, and one of the most sweeping Education Reform Acts in the history of the country. As a matter of fact, after Mississippi passed this act, 11 states came looking for us to help direct them in the creation of a similar piece of legislation. And through it all, here was the editor of the Clarion Ledger, putting that newspaper so solidly behind us that nobody could afford not to pay attention, and especially the members of the legislature. And Charles sent a team of reporters there each time the legislature was in session, and before and after. And they kept up with what was going on up there, member by member. And this is what Charles did. He put on the front page of the Clarion Ledger every day a little black bordered box, and he named it the Hall of Shame, listing those legislators who had voted on various preliminary motions by name, those who had opposed the act. The people of Mississippi had finally spoken as they wanted to speak. They had finally spoken in a way that the members of the legislature responded. And after the act was passed, on the evening that it was passed, I had a red-faced member of the House of Representatives come up to me and say, Governor, that's the last time I'm ever going to vote for anything that I'm against. Anyway, these are the folks, and so many of you are the people that deserve all the recognition. And I'm grateful to them for letting me be on their side. And I'm grateful to all of you for coming here today and letting us talk some more about education, and hopefully it will lead to more action in improving the quality of legislation of education in our state. Thank you so much, Rob, and all of you here in Millsaps for letting us have this opportunity to have this forum here on your campus.
Governor, thank you. Now we want to have a conversation about what we just heard from the governor. You know, this really is a remarkable event. I mean, where can you go anywhere in the United States and have a standing room only crowd to commemorate the passage of a legislative act? Just doesn't happen. 30 years ago, right. We want to celebrate the past, but we also want to focus on the here and now. And I hope this panel, along with some questions with the audience, will allow us to do both. I'm honored to be here, of course, with the governor and also the Boys of Spring. Now, Governor, it seems to me that you continue to be the sage, visionary, but these guys don't look like boys anymore to me. So some things stay the same and some things change. But I will say, because I've been able to maintain a relationship, a good, friendly relationship with the Boys of Spring, individually and collectively, their passion for public service and what's good for Mississippi continues over these 30 years. So I want to start by asking the Boys of Spring here, you know, you heard Governor outline why it was almost impossible to think that the legislature would pass this sweeping Education Reform Act. What made you think that you could get this done this time? And then, now that you've had 30 years of life experience, do you think you'd be as bold today as you were 30 years ago? Dick, why don't you start out?
Well, thank you, Charles. This is most impressive to see all of you here. What made us believe we could do it was that we didn't know any better. We had taken these civics classes and learned about democracy, where people, you know, gave input to the legislators and things happened and bills passed. And literally, we didn't know it couldn't be done. The good news is that Governor Winter knew it probably couldn't be done, but it didn't tell us. So I really do think there's sometimes a place for youthful inexperience and, you know, the energy that came from that. Plus, Governor Winter is always wonderful about deflecting praise, but he led this effort and he was there. We would sometimes come up with cockamamie schemes, and he would kind of reel them back to more normal things, like if we gave speeches in someone's backyard, it was a state senator, we'd get a call from the governor. Now, don't call people by names in front of their constituents, you know. So
that was my job. That
was your job. That was the Hall of Shame thing. And everyone knew who the Hall of Shame was. So it was just inexperienced, but married with